I am sitting down today with Charley Jewett. My name's Randy Hurst. It is March 7th, 2019. And we're continuing our project called Interviewing the Legends of the Steel Pipe Business. And Charley, this is our take two.
That's right.
We got to have...
It was a warm-up, and now we're in for the big kahuna.
That's right. That's right. So what I want to do, Charley, is start by telling me how you got your start in the pipe business, and we'll just kind of take it from there.
Wonderful. When I was in college, I needed a summer job, and there was a little company in Houston called Petro Pipe and Supply that needed someone to load trucks and keep inventory Cardex cards. I applied for the job and got it for the summer. And so I learned how to load trucks and keep inventory on Cardex cards, and I did that for 3 summers until I finished school. After graduating from my undergraduate degree, I went to law school for a brief period of time, determined that was not my cup of tea, and found myself in need of employment. So I went to the then employment agency that handled everybody's job needs in Houston at the time, and they said, you need to go see a company called Proler International Corporation because you have pipe experience, albeit loading trucks and keeping inventory on Cardex cards, but you have pipe experience and they need an inventory manager trainee.
What year was that?
That was in 1974. I interviewed for the job. A man named Frank Lichty interviewed me. Frank had been with Proler for a couple of years. He managed their pipe division. And he had been with a company in Kansas City called Brown Strauss, who was in the pipe business as well. Frank told me, he said, I think you have the job. You'll need to interview with Mr. Proler. I grew up in Houston, and the Proler family had been in Houston for as long as we had, and I knew of the Proler family and their success, but I had absolutely no idea the breadth and the depth and the strength of this company that they had built. The Prolers invented the machine that shredded automobiles. They had a technology with a rotary mill. They loaded an entire car without the tires of the gas tank because the gas tank caused some explosions, even though they'd get through every once in a while. And they ended up, the finished product was ferrous steel and non-ferrous metals separated from the fluff that was the seats and the upholstery and the dashboards and all that stuff. And it annihilated an entire automobile in a minute. It was a beast. They took this process, patented it, it was the Proler process, replicated the facilities through joint ventures all over the United States, and took a local scrap company, Proler Steel Company, and it became Proler International Corporation, New York Stock Exchange listed company, big. And so I'm sitting in front of Mr. Israel Proler, the chairman of the board of Proler International, and he said, why should I hire you? And I said, well, I think I bring hard work and eagerness and interest, and I'm fascinated by what you've done here. And he said, I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to hire you. He said, you worked for those people over there. I don't think I want to hire anybody that worked for them. I said, well, Mr. Proler, I had no idea. He said, you didn't do anything wrong. You loaded the trucks. He hired me and became my mentor.
Fantastic.
He was an amazing man. Their company, their product, revolutionized the way steel was made. Before that, the electric furnace steel process really didn't exist. It was open hearths and blast furnaces. but with this clean, very, very clean, high-density scrap. You could melt it in an electric furnace, and your steel cost, finished steel cost, was appreciably less than the other methods. And so ultimately, because of the Pro-Arizer, as it was called, and the Proer process and Pro-Arized metal, that revolutionized the steel business worldwide.
And then they were able to transform that into a pipe portion of the business?
Pipe was obviously not their principal product, but because of their relationships as a vendor to the steel mills, selling their product to the steel mills, they had the opportunity to purchase secondary pipe from the mills at the time, U.S. Steel, Armco, National Steel, the various ones domestically and some internationally. And they had always had an interest in the pipe business and a presence in the structural pipe business from the days before the automobile shredder came on the scene. And so that grew into one of the largest steel pipe distributors of that kind of product, large diameter structural pipe in the country. And I went to work in their pipe division, and pretty quickly thereafter moved up in the company and had a wonderful, wonderful career with Rollers.
Now, how long did you work with Proler, and then how did that then morph into the next company?
With the Proers for a dozen years. I mentioned Israel Proler, Izzy. He was my direct report, and I had this really unique position as a really young guy to sit across the desk from the chairman of the board of this NYSE company and learn business. And he was very open and very free in sharing his knowledge and his relationships and his connections with me. Pretty quickly thereafter, within a couple of years, the man that first interviewed me, Mr. Lichty, left Proler, and I took over the position as manager of the pipe division. And within another 4 years after that, I was named the vice president of the company. And it was a fascinating, interesting place to work, and literally one of the most profitable businesses that I've ever seen. It was incredible.
What was the next step along the way?
Next step along the way had a lot to do with the NASPD, because I met so many people as the representative of Proler International to the NASPD that through those connections, relationships, and everything, I had an opportunity to start a business with another NASPD member and a third party that would never have even been on the horizon had not Mr. Proler passed away. I knew that I would work for him forever, and unfortunately he passed away, and about that time I was approached by two other people to come in with them as a partner in a company. And so we made that transition. I made that transition in Segway while I was president of the NASPD. I was elected when I was with Proler International and finished my term as Houston Pipe International, which was the business that we started. My partners were Dottie Lytle, who was affectionately known as the Queen of Pipe by all that loved her, and a family business that was really very interestingly much like Proler in Europe. It was the De Boer Group out of Holland. They were in the scrap business, but they also had a very large presence in the pipe business. So the three of us formed this corporation, and our business plan was to bring secondary pipe from Europe and elsewhere and distribute it in the United States. And we took off like a rocket. It was a wonderful, wonderful venture that lasted half a dozen years. The fourth year in, our trade representatives and Commerce Department deemed that pipe was being dumped into the United States. And so they set up a system of allocations, if you will, to the various trading partners, and each one of the trading countries had a number of tons that they could bring in, quotas, if you will. The quotas were, in the various countries, put in the hands of the steel manufacturers, the mills. So in Europe, it was Mannesmann, Vallourec, Ilva, British Steel had quotas to bring pipe in. The traders had no quotas. My business partner, our source of inventory, was a trader. So he was excommunicated from the market literally overnight. We had 12,000 tons of pipe on the water when this happened that sat in embargo at the Port of Houston, paid for a year. It was a bitter pill. So we scrambled around and began, of course, looking for other sources of inventory. And again, my specialty, if I had one, was large diameter structural pipe. And I went to Tubacero, steel pipe manufacturer in Mexico, that makes ERW and DSAW, and began a program of bringing in their materials. As life happens, Dottie was ready to retire by then. My partner was no longer able to export his products to the United States and had no interest in being a third wheel in a company that was doing a completely different thing than from when we started. So 1 year after that, all changed. We made a decision to close the company. And it took me 1 year to sell all the inventory, pay all the bills, close up shop. Dottie retired. We all had a big hug and shook hands, and off we went. And I had no job.
Wow. And that was the mid-90s?
That was in
early 90s?
1990.
1990.
1990 and 91. So we closed the doors on Friday. 3 young children. Saturday morning, they're swimming in the pool. I'm cleaning the pool and thinking, what am I going to do here? Because I've spent a year not looking for another job, but taking care of making sure that everything was done just right to put a bow on this thing and close it down. Right. And the phone rang. And it was a friend of mine that I had met through the NASPD. Again, Moises Woldenberg. Moises, it's Charley. I just heard you closed Houston Pipe. What in the world? And I gave Moises the 5-minute version, and he said, this is very interesting. My father is buying Tubacero. I said, get out of here. That's wonderful, congratulations. It's a perfect venue for y'all. He said, think about coming and helping us with that. I said, I will. I certainly will. I knew the mill inside and out. I loved the product. I knew the people. I respected the institution that was Tubacero, because prior to the Woldenberg's acquisition, it was owned by the Mexican government. It was a unit of their larger nationalized steel industry. Started as a private company, nationalized, and then privatized, and the Woldenbergs made that acquisition. So Moises and I spent 6 months writing my master's thesis in pipe, and at the library, typing. We just barely had computers, and I certainly didn't know how to operate them. So that was quite a feat, putting this thing together.
What was it, a business plan or?
Business plan, it was how do we take this mill that has DSAW, ERW, 3 different production lines, 50,000 tons on this one, 60,000 tons on this one. How do we take this thing that had always serviced its domestic market, Pemex, the nationalized oil company? There was one nationalized entity serving another. And how do we take that and how do we cast it out to the world? And so I presented the business plan to the board of directors. In that meeting, they unanimously accepted and said, by the way, would you like to come and implement it? I said, I certainly would. And off we went. And for the next...
And that was 1991.
91. And until 2001, I was on an airplane. I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in China, I was in Australia, and I was in Mexico a lot. I was there for every board meeting, I was there for mill tours. We had to introduce this company and go through the process of showing an Enron, a Shell, a British Petroleum, a Gas de Venezuela. All these different entities had quality processes and approval processes. And if you, as a pipe mill, weren't on that approved list, no ticky, no washy. It wasn't going to happen. So we had to get Tubacero approved and go through that process. So mill tour after quality assurance, a presentation after a lot of calling, a lot of that thing. Fascinating time. Learned a lot about steel, a lot about pipe that I had never been exposed to before, and gave me a frame of reference in the industry that I certainly had not been exposed to before. I was on the distribution side, and this was manufacturing. So that was a fascinating part of my career. And again, it was that relationship that I had made through the NASPD that allowed that connection to even happen.
Right. So now you're starting from the structural side of it, surplus, almost from salvage and that scrap, along those lines, to now you're selling prime, large diameter, API X grades for the prominent gas and oil companies all over the world.
Right.
What happened after 2001? Then, what turn did it take?
From here?
Yeah.
The focus at Tubacero changed. There were decisions internally to bring the marketing back to Monterey. I was the president of Tubacero International, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of the mill, and Tubacero International's focus and mandate was to sell pipe, fill the mill. We also had a trading function where we purchased raw materials for conversion at the mills. So we had relationships with the Nucors and all the various steel manufacturers, where we were not just opening up Tubacero's products to the world, but we were opening up Tubacero's supply sources from the world. So the Tubacero International was filling that function. There was a decision at Tubacero to take those, at that point, mature processes and bring them in-house. And so we closed that company, and again, I was at a juncture. Okay, so what are we going to do next?
Right.
So I took a completely different turn, Randy. I got into the rebar manufacturing and distribution business, fabrication.
What company was that with?
It was a company called Lone Star Rebar. And we fabricated bar that we purchased from mills. We drew bar from solid grounds, making specialty rebar for the chemical industry. Rebar is a commodity, probably the cheapest of the steel commodities. So there was no space for another rebar fabricator. We had to have a niche. And that niche was just in time, very high specification tolerance rebar into the refining businesses. And that was because of a college relationship. A friend of mine had this company that had been his family, and he wanted to do something bigger and different and broader, and asked me to come on board and run that company for him. So that was a completely different venture for me,
Sure.
outside of steel pipe, and I never thought that would happen.
Right.
Yeah.
When did you jump back into the pipe business? Was that coming back to Pipe and Tube Incorporated?
There was a period after the rebar business, I sold that company, where I had an opportunity to parent my parent. I had a home down in Galveston Bay, and my mother was recovering from cancer. The Bay was a special place in our family. I'd grown up in that water and catching blue crabs and fishing and sailboats and all that thing. And so I had a home there at that time, and I brought my mom in, and she recuperated, and I got to parent my parent for 3 years. After her needs became more than I could take care of, and I had help in the house all that time to help her, but more than she needed more. I was at a place of, I need something to do. I need to occupy my time.
Right.
So I saw an ad on Indeed, and it was for a business development person in a pipe distribution company. I thought, possibly I could do that. So I applied, and it was none other than Marianne Fairmouth, another NASPD member, and I was in her office. Marianne walked by, and she said, "We've not met," and I introduced myself, and she said, "You were president of the NASPD, is that right?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I certainly was." She said, "Well, come on in, let's visit." So that was my entree to business development at a company that I had not known. I did not know Pipe and Tube Supplies.
Okay.
When Pipe and Tube Supplies was started, I was at Tubacero.
Right.
And in a completely different area of the business. Had I still been in distribution, of course I would have known. But I interviewed at Pipe and Tube, and drove up, and there was probably 30,000 tons of pipe sitting in this yard, and a lot of it looked very familiar. Stop, Tubacero,
Right.
all these companies I knew so well, and we got together. And shortly thereafter, the general sales manager was retiring, and they gave me the opportunity to head up the sales group. And I've had a home there ever since, and it's been wonderful to be back in the pipe business.
Oh, fantastic.
Very cool.
Now, I know when one of the things that we've talked about at our first meeting, and that we had so much joy reminiscing about, were some of the characters that we, reminiscing in the good old days, if you will. Dottie Lytle came up. Tell me about Dottie, because I remember just talking to her over the phone. I think I met her one time in Houston, but
Right.
tell me a little bit more about her and some of the other fun characters that pop into your mind.
With Proler, I'd love to tell the Dottie story. Dottie was a dear friend, my business partner, my children's Aunt Dottie. She was part of my family, and we were part of hers. Dottie and I would talk on the phone when I was a telephone salesperson at Provo. She was with a man named Sid Culbertson that had a large oil field service company called Mid-Continent Supply. Mid-Continent was like a national supplier, that kind of level, and Dottie was with Sid. Prior to that, Dottie was Pete Knowles' right-hand gal.
That's right.
Dottie lived in Uvalde. Pete was in Uvalde. Pete started General Supply Company, which became Gensco. And Dottie liked to say it was she and Pete and the guy that ran the forklift. And they began this company, and we all know where that went. Dottie left Uvalde, single mom, moved to Houston, and worked for L.B. Foster Company for a while. And then she went to work for Sid. So fast forward, Dottie and I are on the phone, and one of the funniest people I've ever known in my life. Dottie could spin a tale, told a great joke, and loved people. She was a magnet. So got to know Dottie, and she was strong and gentle. She was a gracious lady in a man's world, and really one of the pioneer women in the steel pipe industry. Dottie was as I've often said, hell when she was well and seldom sick. She was a blast.
That's awesome.
Loved her. Dottie, after she retired from Houston Pipe International, her long-time physical ailments got the best of her. And this is an aside that Dottie wouldn't mind me telling at all. She was tubercular as a young woman, and had only the use of one lung. Yet she sang for 25 years with the Houston Symphony. Incredible gal. Sang like an angel and could tell the bluest joke you've ever heard in your life and sell a lot of pipe. She was great. And of course, Dottie, having known Pete intimately, having known all of the players from the very beginning of this industry, had a wonderful, wonderful network of friends that she introduced me to. And it was through this organization that Dottie's network grew, my network grew, and off we went.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Going back to talking, I like to ask everybody, about the times and the changing of the times.
Sure.
Because when we were, in the pipe business, yourself in the 70s and through the 80s and 90s, we saw a lot of changes. And, some things were significant and profound. Any certain one that you might want to share that
I do. Government involvement in trade was very important, hugely important in our industry, hugely important in my career. The story I shared with you about importation and change of trading patterns, but the steel pipe industry had been a fairly country-centric business prior to those years when I became involved. you bought domestic pipe. Imported pipe was not as prevalent as it was, as it became. And as the importance of the international mills and the quality of their products at some points even surpassed those that were made domestically, the volumes of steel that came in caused political ramifications that affected this industry, and it affected companies, and it affected employment, and those changes along the way, I think, were the things that I noted the most.
And most specifically, you're talking about the trade barriers and the
Trade barriers,
quotas,
import regulations, actual markets that were closed down.
similar to like the 232 that we've dealt with in the last year.
We're living it today.
Right.
It's a pattern that has cycled through the industry. I was thinking back on today's steel issues, the 232, the trade talks today with China, and our trade USTR, Robert Lighthizer. When the year I was vice president of the association, prior to being president the next year, I was head of the program committee and was able to secure then Deputy USTR Robert Lighthizer to address our association on steel industry trade issues. And now here he is back doing the self-same thing, but directing the trade efforts of the United States. So yeah, it's been this recurring theme, Randy, because steel is vital. Steel, we have to have it.
Right.
And it's traded
Yeah.
and made everywhere now.
Yeah. As you look back on your career,
Yes.
are there things that you would change? You know, anything along the way that you wished you would have done differently?
I think I should have become more politically involved. I think I should have taken the opportunity to better understand the roles of all the various players in the political mix that so affected our industry over those times. I didn't spend enough time in Washington. I didn't spend enough time in Brussels. I really wish that I had the time to be able to do that and to more effectively have a voice, a place at the table.
Yeah. If you were going to counsel a young person
Right.
in today about getting into the steel pipe business, or you know, a word of wisdom from the old guy.
A word of wisdom from the old guy. It's all about people. Always has been for me. Mrs. Prower, Izzy's wife, was this great lady named Billy Fay. She was from West Texas. She was sharp and pretty and really clever. We were at dinner at a lovely restaurant in Houston one night. We were celebrating a large venture that I'd put together for the company in South America. And she said, "Charley Jewett, here's the way you do it. You make friends with them. You bring them over to the house. You have a couple of drinks. You go to dinner. You learn about the kids. You learn about the family. And friends do business with friends. And you know what? Make friends.
Great advice.
Make friends. Keep them.
Fantastic. We haven't even touched on the NASPD yet, Charley, and we need to. You know, you were the president of the NASPD, and my notes tell me that was 85, 86. You were our 11th president. and now we're getting up into the mid-30s. So you were really still on the genesis of that whole deal. Give me something about that. Tell me something about that.
It was an honor that I didn't expect. It was something that was daunting when I took office. I was 33, and my contemporaries were gentlemen, many of them self-made, most of them in their mid to upper 50s, and I was seated at the table with them. It was an honor that I never anticipated, but it was one that taught me so much about leadership, about consensus building, about fine-tuning those relationships I spoke of, and being able to understand the motivation that Harry had that would allow him to accept and understand and appreciate Frank's position, and build those consensus to bring the common goal of the association forward. And it was a fairly tumultuous time for the association. Prior to my time in the leadership ranks, we didn't have a lot of non-distributor members. We had associate members that were mills, manufacturers,
Right.
but we specifically did not have trading companies. We did not have people that were brokers, if you will. And there was a realization that part of our industry was not at the table, and we needed to bring them to the table. But how do you do that and meet the needs and the expectations and the investments and hard work of these fellow members that have thousands and thousands and thousands of tons invested in this business and aren't just trading commodities, trading paper. And so we had to work through some of those things, and it was challenging, but it was rewarding because we did make changes in that time and did broaden our scope of membership. And I think that was the most rewarding part for me of my time in office.
Very good. Do you remember where the convention was when you became president?
I was elected at the meeting that we had at Nassau Paradise Island. And I remember wanting to call home and tell some very important people in my family and my life about this, and thinking, gosh, this is an international telephone call I'm about to do.
We talked about your first meeting. You were 25 years old in La Costa, you and your wife, and just starstruck.
Right.
Meeting all these pipe guys. And then Nassau was the meeting that you took the presidency.
Yes.
In 86, 87.
Right. When we walked into the ballroom for the first big dinner at La Costa, I didn't know a soul. And Dwight Byram, Bakersfield Pipe, stood up. And I think he stood up because Joanna was gorgeous and had on a fur stole that was dynamite. I didn't buy it for her, it was borrowed, but she looked like $1 million. And I think he stood up to see who this beautiful lady was and invited us to join him. And we became fast friends forevermore. And gosh, some of the great meetings, Scottsdale, riding in a dune buggy with Joe and Gene Bergfeld over the dunes. I didn't know until just a minute ago that was their honeymoon. my gosh, what a blast. And we went so many places though, and did so many things, and places I'd never been.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, what would you tell somebody was the secret to your success in the pipe business?
Oh my goodness. The NASPD was networking before it was a term. The vision that Jerry and Pete had of bringing together these diverse guys and one lady, Dottie, to a place where they could share experiences, talk about things of common interest, and make a deal, sell some pipe, was visionary. But it was networking in its infancy. And it gets back to my previous statement, Randy, about people. Network, learn the folks, learn the players, understand the motivations for why people are at the table, and make friends.
Yeah.
And that will stand you in great stead.
Very good. Was there anything that you regret? Anything that you wouldn't do again if you had a second chance?
Oh, goodness, probably. But, you know, they're too few to mention.
Sure.
And there were times that were extremely stressful in my career, just like everybody else's.
Right.
But you turn those things upside down, and that new door opens. I never thought I'd be at Pipe and Tube Supplies in Pearland, Texas, for goodness sakes. But it's a cool place to be, and it's a wonderful place where I can share my experience and strengthen knowledge about this business.
Sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything other than the steel pipe business that you're most proud of, or gives you great joy, or
Yes,
wonderful satisfaction?
Absolutely. 3 fabulous children. My oldest child, my daughter Katie, is in politics. She's passionate, does great work, runs a wonderful campaign, gets people elected. I have a son that is a commercial guy in the real estate business, and he and his wife have gifted me with my first grandchild, Molly, who calls me Rocket. Of course, we don't know why. She just started calling me Rocket. It's like, I can accept that. And my youngest daughter, Julie, is in sales, and kind of a chip off the old block.
You got to be proud.
They're the ones.
Fantastic.
They're the ones. Yeah. Thank you for doing this, Randy. It's so cool.
Is there anything I didn't ask you? Anything that I left out, or?
No. It was the thought and preparation that went into this is apparent, and I'm so glad you're doing it, because this is it's important that you capture these guys.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
know about these guys.
That's right. You legends. I love it. Charlie.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
it.
All right. Thanks.
Good.